Whisper Creek, 1887, a town tucked between red cliffs and golden fields where gossip traveled faster than dust in the wind. Folks here didn't need much to stir up talk: a new horse in the corral, a wagon creaking through at sundown, or the sound of boots that didn't belong to anyone they knew. That evening, when the sun dipped low behind the mesa and the saloon lamps began to flicker to life, the stranger arrived. His horse was a tall, dapple-gray stallion, proud but weary from the trail. The man atop it, Elias Boone, carried no companions, no luggage but a worn saddlebag and a colt that gleamed with too much polish for a man who didn't expect trouble. He rode through the main street slowly, like someone measuring each building, each window, each soul who dared look too long. From the boardwalk, the townsfolk whispered, "There he is again, that rider from the South Trail. Looks like he's been through a war. I heard he's a bounty hunter." And then, from the open window of Pearl's parlor, laughter spilled into the street, the kind that tried too hard to be noticed. A few women leaned out, their painted smiles catching the amber lamplight. "Welcome to Whisper Creek, Cowboy," one of them called. Another added, "There's room inside if you're tired of riding alone." Elias tipped his hat, polite but distant, his eyes moving past them without lingering. He didn't slow, didn't speak. He just kept riding until he reached the watering trough outside the old livery stable. That quiet rejection didn't go unnoticed. In a town where everyone's eyes searched for attention, indifference was its own kind of magnet. By the time Elias dismounted, half the street was already watching. He unsaddled his horse, brushed the dust from its mane, and handed a coin to the stable boy. "Feed him well. He's done more miles than I can count." The boy nodded, staring up at the stranger's coat, rough leather with a long tear across the back, like it had seen bullets or worse. "Mister, you stayin' long?" Elias looked toward the horizon before answering. "Long enough." He turned toward the saloon. Inside, laughter burst and broke like a wave. The piano's off-key tune tried to drown out the loneliness that soaked every corner of that room. Elias stepped through the swinging doors and paused. The chatter died just enough for people to glance his way, measure him, then decide whether to ignore him or invite him in. "Whiskey," he said to the barkeep. That voice, deep, calm, controlled, carried a weight that made men shift in their seats without knowing why. He took his drink and leaned against the counter, eyes scanning the room. The girls at the far end giggled and whispered, watching him through half-lowered lashes. But he didn't look at them. His gaze stopped on the farthest table near the piano, where Mara Ellison sat alone, hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. Mara wasn't one of Pearl's girls. She was the blacksmith's daughter, a quiet soul who worked part-time at the general store and took care of her sick mother in the house beyond the creek. Most nights she walked home before dark, but tonight the rain had started early, trapping her inside until the storm passed. Her dress wasn't fancy, just faded blue cotton with a rip at the sleeve she hadn't bothered to mend. Her hair wasn't curled like the other women's, just loosely tied with a piece of twine. But her eyes, deep and steady, had a kind of truth in them that didn't need dressing up. And that's what caught him. Not the color of her hair, not the curve of her smile, but the quiet strength of someone who wasn't trying to be seen. She noticed him too, though she pretended not to. When their eyes met for the briefest moment, it was like the room fell away, the piano, the chatter, the whispers all drowned out by the rain drumming against the windows. Mara looked away first, flustered. Elias didn't move. A drunk rancher beside him muttered, "Every girl in this town's thrown herself at him, and he's staring at the one who won't even smile back." The barkeep chuckled. "Ain't that always the way?" But the truth ran deeper. Elias Boone wasn't here for love, not in the ordinary sense. He had come chasing something buried in the dust of his past, a promise he made on a night that ended in gunfire and guilt. And somehow, seeing Mara sitting there, quiet and unbothered by the world, struck something in him he thought he'd left behind. When the rain finally broke, she stood and gathered her shawl. Her steps were light as she passed by, but the air between them seemed to still. She didn't speak, didn't even look his way. Yet as she stepped out into the night, Elias found himself following her, not because he meant to, but because something in his chest moved before his boots did. Outside, the rain had turned the street to mud, and her worn boots slipped on the boardwalk. Elias caught her arm before she fell. "Easy," he said softly. She blinked up at him, startled. "I'm fine." Her tone wasn't sharp, just firm. She pulled her arm back. He tipped his hat. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," she said, though her voice said otherwise. He waited a beat. "Town's slick tonight. Best let me walk you to the road." "I've walked worse," she replied. He smiled faintly, the kind that never reached his eyes. "Bet you have." Then she turned and walked away, the moonlight catching her wet hair as she crossed the muddy street. Elias watched her go until she vanished behind the row of cedar trees. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know her story. But somehow, that night, he knew this. She'd just become part of his. Back inside the saloon, the whispers started again. "Who is she?" "The blacksmith's girl." "Don't waste your time." "Why not?" "Her father's got more temper than sense, and the sheriff's his friend." Elias turned his glass in his hand and muttered to himself, "Good. Maybe they'll keep her safe this time." The barkeep frowned. "This time?" But Elias didn't answer. He just tossed a coin on the counter, left the saloon, and disappeared into the rain-soaked dark. And so began the story Whisper Creek would whisper about for years, the tale of a man every girl wanted to be seen by, and the one woman who didn't care if he ever looked her way. By dawn, the rain had stopped, leaving behind the smell of wet dust and pine. Whisper Creek looked peaceful from a distance, but up close, the storm had torn shingles loose, flooded troughs, and left the main road thick with mud. Elias Boone stood on the porch of the livery, rolling a cigarette he didn't plan to light. He was watching the town wake up, the shopkeepers sweeping porches, the blacksmith's hammer already ringing, the church bell calling for the early risers. But what caught his eye wasn't the sound of work, it was the faint laugh from across the road. Mara Ellison was outside the general store, setting out crates of flour and salt. Her dress was cleaner now, her hair tied neatly back. She looked like a woman who had already made peace with another long day. Elias didn't mean to stare, but his gaze found her anyway. There was something about how she moved, quiet, steady, with no need for anyone's help. He'd known women who thrived on attention, who measured worth in the tilt of a man's hat or the glance he gave from across the room. But Mara seemed to walk through the world untouched by its hunger for notice. And somehow, that made her more visible than anyone. He was still watching when a voice broke his focus. "You've been here 2 days and already pickin' who to stare at?" Elias turned. Sheriff Clay Ellison leaned on the post, one hand resting near his revolver, not threatening, just reminding. "Didn't realize I was on a clock," Elias said, dry. Clay smirked. "You ain't. Just that around here, folks get curious about strangers with scars and no history." Elias flicked his cigarette away. "You want history? I'll tell you what matters. I pay my debts, and don't start fights I can't finish." "That's so." Clay's tone stayed easy, but his eyes sharpened. "Then let's keep it that way." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The girl you keep looking at? That's my cousin. She's had enough trouble without some drifter making her the next talk of town." Elias met his gaze, calm but unflinching. "Didn't mean disrespect." "Then don't mean to start any," Clay said, and turned to leave. Before he did, he added quietly, "Men come through here all the time thinkin' Whisper Creek soft. It ain't. We remember things who hurt who left who stayed. Just a word of advice, stranger." Elias nodded once. "Appreciate the advice." Clay gave him one more look, then walked off down the boardwalk. Elias watched him go, jaw tight. He'd dealt with lawmen before, some crooked, some clean, most dangerous in ways they didn't even mean to be. But something about Clay's warning wasn't just protective. It was personal. And that made Elias wonder what kind of trouble Mara had really seen. He spent most of that day helping the stable boy repair the broken door hinges. It was mindless work, the kind he liked, but it didn't stop his thoughts from drifting. Every clang of the hammer, every gust of wind carried him back to a memory he'd buried deep. Another town, another woman, and the day everything went wrong. He'd promised never to get close again. Never to look too long. Yet here he was, breaking that promise one glance at a time. By late afternoon, the sky began to pale into that soft copper color that meant another storm might be on its way. Elias decided to grab supplies before riding out for a few days. He stepped into the general store and froze when he saw who stood behind the counter. Mara looked up, startled. "You again?" He half smiled. "Guess I keep wandering where I shouldn't." She hesitated, then gave a small, reluctant smile. "What are you after?" "Coffee. Bullets. Rope." "That's an odd mix." "Coffee keeps me alive," he said, setting a coin on the counter. "The rest keeps me from dying. She looked at him, then really looked. The sun caught the edge of his scar, running from temple to jaw, faint but deep enough to tell a story. She wanted to ask where it came from, but didn't. Instead, she said, "You're not from around here." "No. You. I was born here. Don't plan to die here, though." He raised an eyebrow. "That a promise? A hope?" Elias almost smiled, but there was a weight behind her words he couldn't ignore. "What keeps you?" "My mother," she said softly. "And duty." He nodded slowly. "Duty'll break a person faster than love." She gave him a look, not angry, but curious. "You sound like someone who's seen both." "Maybe," he said, eyes drifting toward the window. "Both took about the same from me." Before she could reply, the door swung open and Clay walked in. Mara straightened. "Sheriff." Clay looked between them, his expression unreadable. "Boone." "Sheriff," Elias replied evenly. "I see you found our fine store," Clay said. "Hope you ain't looking to stay too long." Elias pocketed his change. "Never stayed long anywhere." Clay's eyes hardened just a fraction. "Good. Don't start now." Mara frowned. "Clay." But Elias raised a hand. "It's fine. Man's protectin' his own." He tipped his hat to her. "Miss Ellison." She opened her mouth to respond, but he was already walking out. Clay watched him go, then turned back to his cousin. "You'd do well to keep your distance, Mara." "I wasn't the one who started talking," she said quietly. "I know. But men like him, they carry storms with them. And I've had enough of those around you." Mara's eyes darkened. "You mean after what happened last year?" Clay hesitated, then nodded. "You nearly lost everything once. I won't let that happen again." She looked down. "You can't stop every hurt, Clay." "No," he said softly. "But I can damn well try." Outside, Elias tightened his saddle strap, jaw set. He'd heard enough through the open window to catch the name, Mara Ellison, and the warning. But what stuck with him most was that phrase, "after what happened last year." Whatever had scarred her, the town hadn't forgotten. And now that he'd noticed her, they wouldn't let him forget either. As he mounted his horse and rode toward the outskirts of Whisper Creek, the sky turned the color of bruised copper, thunder rolling like distant gunfire. He wasn't sure why he looked back. Maybe it was instinct, maybe habit, but in that last sliver of light, he saw her standing by the window, watching him go. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. But she was watching. And for Elias Boone, that was enough to make him turn his horse east instead of leaving town like he meant to. He wasn't done here. Not yet. The wind picked up that evening, carrying the dry scent of sagebrush and something faintly metallic, the kind of smell that told Elias a storm wasn't done yet, only pausing before it hit harder. He rode out beyond the town's edge, where the land broke into shallow ravines and the creek split the valley in two. He wasn't running, not exactly. Just needed distance. A man like him had lived too long with ghosts. Sometimes they whispered louder when the air got still. He made camp by the water, set his coffee tin on the fire, and stared at the reflection of his scar in the metal. That scar wasn't from a fair fight. It was from the night a friend turned on him at a name he hadn't spoken in years. Rafe Coulter. A bounty partner once, until greed and whiskey carved the line between them. Elias hadn't seen him since that night, but he carried Rafe's betrayal like a brand, one that burned hotter every time someone said the word trust. He took a sip of coffee, dark and bitter, and tried to push the memory away. But the more he tried, the more another face rose in its place, Mara's. The way her eyes didn't plead or flinch, just saw. He cursed under his breath and tossed the tin aside. He'd told himself he wasn't staying long. But that promise was already breaking, piece by piece. Back in town, the storm broke again. Wind rattled shutters, and the old church bell clanged like a ghost's warning. Mara closed the store early and hurried home, clutching her shawl. The road was slick, the night sharp with cold. As she reached the footbridge by the creek, lightning flashed, and in that instant, she saw him. A man on horseback stopped just beyond the willows, watching her. Her heart stuttered. "Elias," she called. But the figure didn't move. Then, as thunder rolled, the horse turned, and she saw the face. Not Elias. Not anyone she wanted near her again. "Evenin', Miss Ellison," the man drawled, voice cutting through the rain. "Didn't expect to see you out here alone." It was Jed Calhoun, the ranch foreman for her father's old employer. A man who'd once courted her out of convenience and turned cruel when she said no. She gripped the bridge rail. "You should go, Jed." "Should I? Word is you think you're too good for folks now. But we both know what happened last year. Some say you begged for it." Her stomach twisted. "Don't." He stepped closer, his grin widening. "Don't what? Remind you how your name got dragged through the mud? How could your own kin not clear it?" She took a step back. "If you've got any sense left, you'll ride on." He laughed. "You gonna stop me?" The answer came before she could speak, the sharp click of a revolver being cocked. Jed froze. Elias Boone stepped out from the trees, rain sliding off his hat brim. His eyes were calm, too calm. "She ain't gotta stop you, Calhoun. That's my job." Jed's face went pale. "Who the hell are you?" "Doesn't matter. Ride out now, or I'll send your horse home without you." Jed hesitated, jaw tight. But one look at Elias told him the man wasn't bluffing. He spat on the ground, then swung into his saddle. "This ain't over," he growled. Elias stepped closer, gun steady. "It is for tonight." Jed turned and rode off into the storm. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the rain hammering the wood and the creek roaring below. Finally, Elias lowered his gun. "You all right?" Mara's breath trembled. How long were you there?" "Long enough," he said. "Saw him trailing you from town." Her hands shook, but she forced herself to look at him. "I didn't need saving." "Didn't say you did." "Then why follow me?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Because he's the kind who doesn't stop when told." She looked away, eyes glistening in the rain. "You don't know what he's done." "No," Elias said, "but I can guess." For a moment, the storm filled the silence between them. Then, softly, she said, "Last year, he started a rumor, said I'd been with him, that I carried his child." It was a lie, but in a town like this, lies stick faster than truth. "My father died fighting to defend my name." The sheriff, Clay, he still tries. But people remember what they want. Elias' jaw clenched. "And he's still breathing. I don't want him dead," she said firmly. "I just want peace." He looked at her like he was trying to understand how a person could still sound gentle after so much cruelty. "You deserve more than peace." Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time, there was something unguarded there, something fragile. "And what do you deserve, Mr. Boone?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the river, the storm, the way her hair clung to her face like spun gold in the lightning. "Sleep," he said finally. "Haven't had that in a while." A faint smile touched her lips. "You should try it sometime." Then she turned and walked toward home, her lantern bobbing through the rain. Elias stayed behind, the thunder rolling over him like a heartbeat. He holstered his gun but didn't move for a long time. Something about her words, "I just want peace," had settled deep in him, in the place where his guilt usually lived. When he finally returned to town the next morning, the whispers had already started again. "Boone's been seen with the blacksmith's girl. They were out by the creek last night. She's cursed, and now he will be too." Elias ignored them all. He'd lived long enough to know the difference between rumor and truth, and this time, he wasn't walking away from the one person who saw the difference too. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Jed Calhoun wasn't finished. By sundown, he'd been seen riding hard toward Dry Valley, where a familiar outlaw camped, a man with a scar on his cheek and a grudge that hadn't healed. Rafe Coulter. And that meant trouble was coming for Whisper Creek, trouble with Elias Boone's name written all over it. The storm passed by dawn, leaving the land drenched and clean, that deceptive calm the prairie wears before trouble rides back in. The air smelled of wet dust and pine, and the whole of Whisper Creek seemed to be holding its breath. Elias Boone stood outside the smithy, sharpening a blade that wasn't his. His hands moved with a steady rhythm, but his eyes kept straying toward the road out of town. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that moment by the bridge, the look on Mara's face when she said she didn't need saving. He knew she meant it. That wasn't pride, that was survival. Still, something about it stuck under his skin like a splinter he couldn't pull free. Sheriff Clay passed by just then, tipping his hat. Boone. Sheriff. Clay stopped, chewing the end of a matchstick. Heard you had a run-in with Jed Calhoun last night. Wouldn't call it a run-in, Elias said. He was picking on the wrong person. I just set him straight. Clay nodded slowly. That wrong person happened to be Mara Ellison? Elias looked up. Word gets around fast. Always does here, the sheriff said. You're a drifter with a gun. She's a woman folks already whisper about. You stand near her too long, they'll start painting you in her picture. Elias's jaw flexed. Then let 'em paint. Clay studied him, then said quietly, rumor's a meaner bullet than most guns I've seen. You can dodge one. The other sticks to you forever. Elias didn't reply. The sheriff's boots crunched on the gravel as he walked away. By mid-morning, Mara came by the smithy with a small package wrapped in cloth. For the horseshoes you fixed, she said, holding them out. Biscuits. Elias took it, still not meeting her eyes. You didn't have to. I know. But I wanted to. She started to leave, but paused. Clay told me what he said to you. He's right. This town doesn't forgive easily. Neither do I, Elias said quietly. Mara gave a small, tired smile. Maybe that's why I don't mind you being around. Then she walked off, sunlight cutting across her hair like gold threads. Elias stood there longer than he meant to, holding that package like it weighed more than iron. But trouble wasn't far. By noon, dust rose along the southern road, 2 riders, hard and fast. They came from Dry Valley, where decent folks didn't go. One of them was Jed Calhoun. The other wore a long black coat and a scar across his cheek like a broken promise. Hell, Elias muttered when he saw them from a distance, the scar glinting in the light. Rafe. He'd known it was only a matter of time before the past came calling. Rafe Coulter didn't ride anywhere without a reason, and Elias had given him plenty. They stopped outside the saloon. Rafe dismounted slowly, the kind of slow that made every eye in town turn his way. He looked around like he owned the air. Well, Rafe said, his grin crooked. Whisper Creek. Thought I'd find you hidin' in a hole somewhere, Boone. Didn't think you'd trade your gun for horseshoes. Elias stepped out into the street. You got something to say, Rafe, say it. Got plenty, Rafe said. But maybe we should start with introductions. Some of these fine folks don't know their new blacksmith used to be one of the best bounty men this side of the divide, until he left me for dead. The words dropped heavily. People paused mid-step. Mara stood across the street, frozen. Elias' face stayed calm. You shot first, Rafe. I missed, Rafe said with a grin. You didn't. Jed Calhoun chuckled. Seems like you two got history. Maybe I came to the right man after all. Elias looked between them. You two ride together now? Temporary arrangement, Rafe said. Jed here tells me there's money in this town and someone worth ruining. His gaze shifted toward Mara. Elias moved before he knew it, stepping between them. Don't. Rafe raised a brow. Still playing the protector, huh? Guess the rumors are true. You got yourself another lost cause. Elias's hand hovered near his holster. She ain't part of this. Rafe smiled, that old, cold smile. That's where you're wrong, partner. She's the reason I'm here. Calhoun's got a story. Said the lady ruined his reputation. Said the whole town turned on him. So, I figured we could help each other. I get my revenge. He gets his name back. You. He leaned forward. You lose everything again. Elias didn't blink. You never learn when to quit. Rafe's eyes hardened. You never learn to finish the job. The street had gone quiet. A few folks slipped inside buildings, closing shutters. Everyone knew what this kind of silence meant. Then Sheriff Clay's voice broke it. That's enough. He stepped into the street, hand on his gun. "We're not doing this here." Rafe laughed. "Still playing sheriff in a ghost town, Clay? You always did like rules. Thing is, men like me and Boone don't have 'em." Clay's eyes flicked to Elias. "Is he telling the truth?" Elias hesitated. "Then, most of it." "That's all I need to hear," the sheriff said. "Rafe, you and your friend ride out. Now." Rafe smirked. "You really think you can stop me?" "I don't have to," Clay said. "Boone will." Elias looked at him sharply. The sheriff met his gaze. "You owe me for letting you stay. Don't make me regret it." Rafe chuckled, stepping back. "Another time, then. But don't go far, Boone. I've got something you want, and I'll trade it when I'm ready." He turned his horse, and with a whistle, the two men rode off, leaving dust and whispers behind. Elias stood still for a long moment. The crowd thinned. Mara crossed the street slowly. "Who is he?" she asked. "The past," Elias said. She looked at him, really looked. "Then you can't keep pretending to outrun it." "I'm not," he said. "Just hoping it don't hurt you too." Her voice softened. "It already has." And in that moment, Elias realized she wasn't talking about him. She was talking about the town, about years of judgment, lies, and fear. The kind that no bullet could fix. But Rafe's arrival changed everything. He wasn't here just for revenge. He had something else, something dangerous. And by nightfall, Elias would find out just what kind of game his old partner had come to play. By the time the sun slipped behind the hills, Whisper Creek had gone quiet, that uneasy hush that came after strangers rode through. Folks shuttered their windows early, lamps glowed dim behind lace curtains, and even the coyotes seemed to keep their distance from town. Inside the smithy, Elias Boone sat at his workbench, a lantern burning low beside him. He wasn't working. The tools lay untouched, iron cold. He just sat there, staring at a strip of leather he'd been carving earlier, a half-finished belt with no buckle. A knock came at the door. He didn't answer. Another knock. Then a voice. "Elias." "It's me. Mara." He hesitated, then opened the door. She stood in the lamplight, her hair tied back, shadows under her eyes. "Sorry to come this late," she said softly. "But I saw the look on your face when that man rode off." Elias stepped aside, letting her in. "You shouldn't be here." "I'm already talked about, Elias," she said. "What's one more rumor?" He gave a humorless laugh. "That's not a thing to joke about in this town." "I'm not joking," she replied. Then, quieter. "You think I don't hear them? The whispers in the store, the looks when I pass. It stopped hurting a while ago. Now it just weighs." He didn't know what to say. He'd seen that kind of strength before, the quiet kind that didn't show off, that just endured. "I need to ask," she said. "Who is that man, Rafe?" Elias leaned against the table. "Used to ride with him. Bounty work, years back. He was quicker with a gun and slower with a conscience." "So why's he here now?" "That's the part one don't know," Elias admitted. "But if he's got a reason, it ain't a good one." Mara watched him for a moment. "You think he came for me?" "I think Jed Calhoun fed him something," Elias said. "A lie, maybe? Or half of one?" Mara's lips trembled slightly. "And if it wasn't all a lie?" He looked up sharply. She turned away, walking toward the window. "People said things about me after I turned down Jed. Said I wasn't as decent as I looked. Said I carried someone's child. It wasn't true, not like they meant it. But..." She stopped, her breath catching. "I did care for someone once. Before all this. He was a drifter, too. Promised he'd send for me. Never did." Elias's hands tightened. "He hurt you?" She nodded once. "Left me with a letter that didn't have a name at the bottom. The town didn't forgive me for believing him. That was all it took, belief." Elias's chest felt heavy. He didn't pity her. He understood her. "Mara," he started, but before he could finish, the sound of hooves echoed down the street. Then, a metallic clink on the doorstep. Elias moved fast, pulling the door open. A small tin star lay on the step. Sheriff Clay's badge. And beside it, a folded piece of paper. He picked it up and read. "Trade. Tomorrow at sundown, by the old windmill. You bring what's mine, I'll return what's yours. R.C." Elias's jaw tensed. R.C. Rafe Coulter. What's his? Mara asked quietly. Elias turned the note over, and something small fell out, a photograph, yellowed with age. A man in a Confederate coat, holding a young woman with familiar eyes. Mara froze when she saw it. That's, she whispered. My mother. Elias looked closer. Then Rafe's got more than a grudge. He's got your past. Mara stepped back, shaking her head. No. My mother died when I was 7. She couldn't have known anyone like him. Elias frowned. Then how the hell does he have this? A realization crawled through him like ice. Rafe always played long games, emotional ones. He never wanted gold or land. He wanted control. He's not after money, Elias said. He's after leverage. Over who? Mara asked. Me, Elias said darkly. Because now he knows the one thing I care about in this godforsaken town. The next day stretched slowly, every hour crawling towards sundown. Elias packed his revolver, oiling it with practiced care. The old iron gleamed like it still remembered every gunfight, every bad decision. Sheriff Clay found him outside. You gonna tell me what's going on? Rafe's got your badge, Elias said simply. Means he came through you first. Clay sighed, rubbing his temple. He ambushed me on the road. Took it as a message. You should have told me. I'm telling you now, the sheriff said. And I'm telling you this too, whatever he's after, don't play his game. Elias's gaze hardened. I already am. Sundown. The sky burned orange behind the hills as Elias rode out toward the old windmill. It creaked slowly in the breeze, half broken and tilting like an old man's back. Rafe was already there, leaning against his horse. The tin star hung from his fingers. Right on time, he said. I always liked that about you. Elias dismounted. You've got something that doesn't belong to you. Rafe smiled. Everything belongs to someone, Boone. Just depends who's willin' to claim it. You've been diggin' where you shouldn't. Oh, I've been diggin' in truth, Rafe said. You ever tell the lady who you really are? That you were there the night her father was killed. Elias's eyes narrowed. Careful. Rafe laughed. Oh, she doesn't know, does she? Course not. You were just the bounty man. Didn't realize the wanted man you shot had a daughter waitin' at home. Elias froze. That's right, Rafe said softly. The man you put down in Coldwater Creek 10 years ago. Thomas Ellison. Her father. The words hit like a bullet. Elias stepped forward slowly. You're lying. Am I? Rafe held up the photograph. This was taken 2 months before that night. Her mother and her father. Your bullet made her an orphan. Elias's throat went dry. He was wanted for robbery and murder. Sure, Rafe said. But we both know half those posters were lies made to fill pockets. You didn't question it then. Mara's voice cut through the air like a ghost. Elias? She'd followed him. Her eyes started between them to the photo in Rafe's hand. What is that? Rafe smiled. Truth. Elias turned. Mara, don't. Is it true? She demanded. He couldn't answer. That silence said everything. Rafe chuckled, holstering his gun. Well, that's my cue. I'd say my trade's complete. You lose her. I win. He turned to leave, but Elias's voice stopped him cold. Not yet. The gunshot cracked the air like thunder. Rafe staggered, clutching his shoulder. Next one's the heart, Elias said, revolver steady. And I don't miss twice. Rafe smirked through the pain. Still think you're savant her? You're just proving me right. He stumbled onto his horse and rode into the dark. Mara stood frozen, tears glinting in the fading light. Elias lowered his gun, breath shaking. I didn't know, Mara. God help me, I didn't know. She backed away. You were the man I was told to hate. Then she turned and ran, leaving him standing there, alone with the truth and the dying sun. The night Mara ran, the desert wind carried her cries farther than she ever meant to let them go. Whisper Creek slept unaware that 2 lives had just come apart in the dust outside its borders, one built on truth, the other on guilt. Elias Boone stood there long after she vanished into the dark. The revolver felt heavier than it ever had, his chest burning with something he couldn't name. For years, he'd carried that gun with pride, a tool of justice, of order. Now it felt like the symbol of everything he'd ever gotten wrong. He'd killed men before, sure. but never one who had a daughter left behind. Morning came gray and cold. Whisper Creek woke slowly, the air thick with whispers. Folks had seen Mara ride out before dawn, her eyes red, her hands trembling. Sheriff Clay stopped by the smithy around noon. He didn't knock, just came in, sat down, and poured himself a cup of black coffee from the pot on the stove. "I heard about the windmill," he said finally. "Heard Rafe Coulter left a trail of blood south. Elias didn't turn from the forge. He's not dead. Not yet. Seems like you might wish you were," the sheriff said. "Town's talkin', Dot." Elias set down the hammer. "They'll talk till their tongues wear out." "They're talkin' about her, too," Clay said quietly. "You and her. You know how people are when they smell scandal." Elias exhaled slowly. "She didn't deserve this. None of it." Clay studied him for a long moment. "Then fix it. The truth's the only thing louder than gossip in this town. Truth's the thing that got us here." "Maybe," Clay said, rising to leave. "But sometimes truth can mend what lies broken if you've got the stomach to dig it out." By afternoon, Elias had saddled up and ridden toward the old telegraph station on the edge of town. The operator, a wiry man named Finch, owed him a favor. "I need a record," Elias said, dropping a coin on the counter. 10 years back. Wanted posters from Coldwater Creek." Finch frowned. "That's diggin' old ghosts, Boone. I'm already haunted." Finch nodded and shuffled through dusty drawers. After a few minutes, he pulled out a folded sheet. "Found one. Thomas Ellison. Says, wanted for armed robbery and the killing of Deputy Marshal Rayner." Elias read the faded ink. His stomach twisted. He flipped the poster over and saw something that made his pulse jump. Stamped on the back, faint but still legible. "Bounty approved by Marshal J. Calhoun." Jed Calhoun. The same man now running half the county's ranches, and the one whose name had been whispered in every dark corner of Whisper Creek since the trouble started. Elias gritted his teeth. Jed had bought and sold more than cattle in his time. He'd sold justice, too. And he'd used Elias to do it. Mara didn't go far. She'd thought she could ride until her tears dried out, but by dusk she'd found herself sitting by the same creek that cut behind the town. The one Elias had first found her nearly weeks ago. The water was low, just enough to mirror her face back at her, pale, tired, older than she felt. When she heard hoofbeats behind her, she didn't turn. "I told you not to follow," she said. "I didn't," Elias answered quietly. "You came back." Mara turned slowly. "What do you want, Elias?" "To finish what you started 10 years ago." He shook his head. "To undo it." She laughed bitterly. "You can't unkill a man." "No. But maybe I can prove he shouldn't have died." That made her pause. "What do you mean?" He handed her the poster. "Your father wasn't what they said. Jed Calhoun approved the bounty. He forged those warrants. I didn't know it then, but I do now. Your father was framed." Mara stared at the faded paper. "Why?" "Because Jed wanted his land," Elias said. "And your father wouldn't sell." "I remember the poster. The ink was still wet when I got it. I should have known." She swallowed hard. "And you want me to believe this makes you the hero now?" Elias looked her in the eyes. "No. It makes me guilty. But it might make him innocent. And I aim to prove that before Rafe uses this story to burn us both." Mara's expression softened, though her voice stayed sharp. "Why do you care now?" He hesitated. "Because I thought I could live without forgiving myself. Turns out I can't." For a long time, she said nothing. Then she folded the poster, tucking it into her jacket. "If we do this," she said finally, "we do it together. But not because I forgive you. Because I need to know the truth." Elias nodded once. "Fair enough." They rode out before dawn the next day, following the trail south toward Coldwater Creek, the place where her father had fallen, and where Jed Calhoun's men still worked his land. The road was long and empty, the air sharp with the scent of sage. Every mile seemed to bring old memories to the surface, for Elias, the men he'd buried, for Mara, the ghost she'd grown up missing. By mid-morning, they reached the ridge overlooking Calhoun's ranch. The land was too perfect: green fences, new barns, and a grand house built on someone else's bones. Mara reined in her horse. "You think we'll find proof here?" Elias scanned the horizon. If there's any left, it'll be in his ledgers. Jed always wrote down what he stole. Made him feel clever. And if we get caught? He smiled faintly. Then we'll find out if I've still got my aim. Mara gave him a look. You really think shooting your way through everything is the answer? He shook his head. Not this time. This time, I'll try something harder, talkin' dot. She blinked, half amused despite herself. That'll be the day. They waited until nightfall before moving closer. The ranch lights glowed softly against the dark, and the lowing of cattle covered their footsteps as they crept toward the main house. Inside, laughter floated through the open window, Jed Calhoun entertaining guests, drunk on his own success. Elias slipped inside through the back, past crates and shelves stacked with books, tools, and old records. His eyes fell on a heavy oak cabinet labeled T. Ellison 1877. He broke the lock quietly. Inside were deeds, letters, and ledgers, all signed with Jed's tidy handwriting. And one sealed envelope marked Marshall Rayner Incident. He opened it. A confession half-written, unsent, from Jed himself. It told of how he'd arranged the false bounty, bribed the marshal, and had Ellison killed when he refused to sell. Mara's voice trembled behind him. It's true. He turned, but before either could move, a voice from the doorway drawled, Ain't polite to steal from a man's house. Jed Calhoun stood there, revolver aimed, smile cruel. Didn't think you'd crawl back, Boone. And with his daughter, no less. Elias slowly lowered the letter. End of the line, Jed. Jed smirked. For you, maybe. For her, I got other plans. The click of the gun echoed like thunder in the still night. The ranch fell silent, the only sound the rasp of wind against the window shutters. Jed Calhoun stood in the doorway, gun steady, eyes glittering with the same greed that had poisoned Whisper Creek for years. Elias Boone didn't move. The barrel aimed at his chest felt colder than iron. Behind him, Mara Ellison's breath caught, half fear, half fury. Jed's smile widened. I should have killed you when I had the chance, Boone. But back then you were useful. Now you're just in the way. Elias kept his voice calm. You forged warrants, Jed. You killed her father. That letter in my hand proves it. Jed laughed. You think any court will believe the word of a washed-up gunslinger and a drifter girl over mine? I own the judge in Coldwater. Mara stepped forward, trembling but unbroken. You can't buy what's already been taken, Jed. You stole his life, but you won't steal the truth. Jed's eyes narrowed. The same truth that'll ruin this whole town? You think these people care about right and wrong? They care about survival. And I give it to them. Elias saw the twitch in Jed's finger. He knew that look, the half-second before a man pulled the trigger. Down, he barked, shoving Mara behind a crate. The shot exploded, wood splintered near his shoulder. Elias fired back, the report echoing like thunder. Jed ducked behind the desk, cursing. Smoke thickened. Horses neighed outside. Somewhere a lantern crashed, flames licking up the wall. Mara crawled to the side door, eyes watering. Elias, the fire. I see it. Go. But she didn't run. She grabbed a poker from the hearth and swung it hard when Jed lunged out. The iron connected with a sickening crack. Jed staggered, dropped the revolver, and fell to his knees. Elias stepped forward, breathing hard, the firelight painting his face in red and gold. Jed glared up through blood. You think killin' me fixes anything? Elias shook his head. No, but tellin' the truth might. He dropped the letter in Jed's lap. You'll sign it. Every word. You'll confess before the marshal, or the flames'll do the confessin' for you. Jed's laugh came ragged. You ain't got the guts to drag me alive. Elias's hand trembled. I've killed enough men. But I'll not let another die a liar. Outside, the ranch hands had gathered, drawn by the smoke and gunfire. When Elias and Mara stumbled out, Jed between them, bound and beaten, the men froze. Boss, one of them whispered. Jed tried to sneer but coughed instead. Don't just stand there, shoot 'em. No one moved. Mara's voice cut through the night. He killed my father. He lied to you all. He's the reason every man here's worked a stolen ranch. She held up the letter, edges scorched but legible. Here's his name on the bounty that murdered Thomas Ellison. A murmur spread through the crowd. Jed looked around, realizing the tide had turned. Y'all owe me, he shouted. I gave you jobs. Land. Elias said quietly, you gave them chains. Jed lunged, breaking free long enough to grab a fallen pistol, but before he could aim, a single shot cracked the air. He froze, then fell. The crowd parted. Sheriff Clay stood at the edge of the firelight, guns still smoking. Guess I'll be talking that confession, Clay said. Elias met his eyes. You knew. Clay holstered his gun. Not till tonight. But a man learns to wait for the truth to crawl out of the dirt. It always does. They buried Jed Calhoun at dawn, out by the river where the grass grew high. No preacher, no headstone, just the sound of water and wind. Mara stood beside the grave, silent. Her hands still shook, but not from fear anymore. Elias joined her. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, she said, you could have run. You could have let the fire take it all. He nodded. I thought about it. Why didn't you? He looked out over the valley, the first sunlight touching the horizon. Because I saw your father's face every time I closed my eyes. I figured if the truth cost me my life, it was worth paying. Mara's eyes softened, but tears gathered anyway. You can't undo what's done. No, he said quietly. But maybe I can start doing right by what's left. She turned toward him then, really looking at him, the man who'd taken everything from her, and somehow was giving her back the one thing she'd lost, peace. Maybe, she whispered, we both can. By midday, Whisper Creek was already talking about the fire, the confession, the fall of the man who'd owned half the county. Some cursed Elias's name. Others called him a savior. He didn't listen to any of it. That night, as he packed his saddlebag, Mara stepped into the doorway. You're leaving, she said. For a while, he replied. Sheriff wants to clean things up without my shadow hanging over it. She nodded, quiet. And if you come back? He smiled faintly. Then maybe I'll have a reason to stay. Mara took a slow step closer. And if you don't? He hesitated, then tipped his hat. Then I hope you find someone whose smile's softer than I ever could. Her laugh was wet with tears. That's a tall order, Elias Boone. He grinned, the first true grin in years, and swung up onto his horse. As he rode out into the orange-pink dawn, the town behind him small and hazy, Mara watched until the dust swallowed him whole. Then she whispered to the wind. Every girl in town wanted the cowboy's smile, but I was the one who saw the man behind it. The river hadn't changed. 5 years could grind a man down, but the Whisper Creek kept the same slow voice, winding through the cottonwoods like it was still 1887. Elias Boone reined in his horse at the ridge and watched the valley below. The town looked smaller now, patched roofs, the new church spire, a few children chasing a stray chicken through the dust. He smiled faintly. Life had gone on without him. He looked older, the way weather ages a fence post, cracked but standing. The scar on his cheek had gone pale, the one Jed Calhoun had given him that night of fire and gunpowder. Some nights, he still woke with smoke in his lungs. But he was back. And maybe this time, he wouldn't have to run. When he rode down Main Street, the whispers followed. That's Boone. Didn't he shoot Calhoun? Thought he was long gone. He tipped his hat but didn't slow. He wasn't here for forgiveness. He was here for the truth. The saloon looked almost the same, new sign, same squeaky door. Inside, the piano sat silent under a layer of dust. The barkeep froze mid-pour when he saw him. Boone. Clay still sheriff? Elias asked. The barkeep nodded. Older, slower. Lives by the river now. Elias tossed a coin on the counter. Then I'll ride there. Clay was fishing when he found him, hat low, line still, boots in the water like he'd become part of the creek itself. Figured you'd come back someday, Clay said without turning. Didn't figure you'd still be breathing, Elias shot back. Clay chuckled. Guess neither of us was made to die easily. He reeled in a fish, tossed it back. Heard you been workin' cattle up north. Sometimes. Mostly I've been running from ghosts. Any catch up? 1 or 2. They sat quiet for a long moment. Only the wind and the creek talked. Clay finally said, You ain't here for me. Elias shook his head. I came to see her. Mara Ellison still lived on her father's land. The cabin was repaired now, flowers along the fence and a small corral where 2 Maras grazed. He dismounted slowly, unsure if the world would welcome him. She stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw him, she froze, sunlight spilling around her like a halo. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then she said softly, "Took you long enough, cowboy." He smiled. "The road was longer than I thought." "You hungry?" she asked. He nodded. "Starved." She smiled back, faint but real. "Then don't just stand there." Inside smelled of coffee and bread. She'd changed the lines near her eyes, the calm steadiness of someone who'd stopped waiting. As they ate, he told her about the cattle drives, the storms, the nights when he almost turned back. She told him about rebuilding, about the townsfolk who'd finally stopped looking at her with pity. And then, about halfway through the meal, she said quietly, "You should know, the ranch isn't mine anymore." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I sold most of it. Used the money to build the school." He blinked. "A school?" She nodded. "For the children who don't have a name in this town. For the ones whose fathers never came back from Calhoun's wars." He looked at her, wonder softening his face. "Your father'd be proud." She smiled. "I hope so. I did it for him. And for you." When dusk fell, they walked down to the river. Fireflies floated over the water, the same river that had carried Jed Calhoun's sins away. Elias threw a pebble in. "You ever think about that night?" "Every day," she said. "But not the fire or the gunshots. I think about what you said afterward, that some truths cost too much to keep." He nodded. "I still believe that." "Then tell me one more truth, Elias Boone. Why'd you really come back?" He hesitated, hat in his hands. "Because I never stopped seeing you by that fire. You were the only thing in this world I couldn't outrun." Her eyes shimmered, reflecting the silver of the creek. "And what happens now?" He took a breath. "I can't change what I did. But maybe I can build what's next if you'll have me." She smiled sadly. "You don't have to build it alone." The next morning, the town woke to news that Elias Boone was back. Some cared. Most didn't. Life went on, new ranchers, new dust, same wind. But down by the river, under the willow where the water curved, two figures stood side by side, watching the sun climb over the ridge. He'd traded his gun belt for work gloves. She handed him the first beam of wood for a bridge they planned to build, a crossing between her land and the school. "Funny," he said, "all that fightin' to stay apart, and now we're buildin' a way to meet halfway." She laughed. "Guess the river finally taught you something, Dot." "Yeah," he said softly. "It ends where it begins." They stood there a long while, not needing words. The water shimmered gold, carrying their reflections downstream, two ghosts made real again. And as the wind whispered through the trees, it seemed to say the same line that had started everything. Every girl tried to catch his eye, but the cowboy looked only at the one who didn't try.